We're studying a play that occupied the minds, the intellects of people just about from the very first time it appeared in ancient Greece. As you've probably gathered in your readings, many people have had many theories about this play, and I could say that in those differences of opinion, we find really important ways of viewing this deep and challenging work. As I'm sure you've already gathered, this is not an easy play to understand. It challenges us. It challenges us to get at the very core of human experience, and that's what makes it such a extraordinarily important classical work. What I'm going to do in this presentation is to talk a little bit about Sophocles, and then to go right into the play. We're going to look at some of the important passages of the play, and then we're going to turn to the most important thing that we have to do in this class, which is to understand it and to understand why it's a classic work, why it's important for us to labor to understand it. Sophocles lived a long life. Born, it appears, several years before the Persians invaded Greece and the Greeks, the Athenians, defeated them on the plains of Marathon. And he lived almost to the end of the 5th century. We have a pretty good idea of when he died in the year 406 BCE. One of the sad things about classical antiquity is how little of its great works really have come down to us. Sophocles was credited in antiquity with writing 123 plays. Of that number, 7 survive. We have fragments that have shown up on papyri, and we have quotations from some of the lost plays in other classical authors. But we only have 7. We know that he fought in the Samian War in 440 BCE, alongside Pericles, the great leader, general of the Athenian democracy. He was quite civic-minded. He held civic office as a financial commissioner, and in antiquity his reputation was for one of piety towards the gods, good nature, and very loyal service to the city of Athens. The play that we are studying, Oedipus the King, or by its Latin name that you'll often hear, Oedipus Rex, or sometimes it's the transliteration of its Greek name, Oedipus Touranos, was written sometime after the year 430 BCE. Here in brief is the story of Oedipus. His father, Laius, was a house guest of Pelops, and he committed one of the worst sins against hospitality, namely he raped his host's son. For this, Pelops curses him. And in some interpretations, in some of the myths, Oedipus is to be seen as bearing the curse of his father upon him, the sins of the father being visited upon the sons, which was a very live concept in ancient Greece. But Laius himself goes on to marry Jocasta, and he receives a prophecy from Delphi that he will have a son who will kill him. So he does what so many characters in Greek tragedy do, thinking that he can avoid his fate. When the baby is born, he puts a thong through its ankles and gives the baby to a household slave to take into the wilds, leave it there, so that it will die of exposure or be eaten by wild beasts. But one way or another, that this child fated to kill him will not have the chance. And the thong through the ankles is an important clue later on. It means swollen foot, and Oedipus indeed has the scars from that mutilation as an infant. I should mention that this never works in Greek tragedy. One cannot avoid fate, and children put out to die have an eerie way of just turning up again. So we're going to look more carefully in the various steps of what brought Oedipus from Corinth, where he had been raised by another couple, back to Thebes, the city where Laius was king. On the way, he gets into a fight with a nobleman who tries to drive him off the road. The nobleman has retainers with him, and Oedipus kills all of them except one who manages to escape. On his way into the city of Thebes, he encounters the Sphinx, this horrifying creature. We're going to look at some pictures of her in a moment, both ancient and more recent. A combination of a woman and animals. And the Sphinx asks passersby a riddle. If they can't answer her riddle, she kills them. Well, Oedipus is able to answer this riddle, and the riddle is very germane to the story that is told in this tragedy. The Sphinx would ask, what is it that walks first on 4 legs, and then on 2 legs, and then on 3 legs? The answer, of course, being a human. It crawls, and then it walks, and then in old age walks on a cane. Now, why is this important? 2 things. First of all, it shows his intellect. Nobody else could solve the riddle of the Sphinx. But more than that, it is a way of encapsulating human life. And Oedipus, who solves the riddle of the Sphinx, is now in this play trying to solve the riddle of his own birth. So that the Sphinx is not a haphazardly chosen figure in this play. It sets the whole theme for Oedipus and his quest. The gods, however, do not tolerate a person who is polluted, who has committed some act of impiety to remain. And the city that takes in such a person, or who even by accident houses such a person, is liable to incur the wrath of the gods. And so it is. Apollo sends a plague upon the city of Thebes. And when the play begins, we understand that Oedipus has been trying very hard to solve the mystery. Why has this plague fallen on the city of Thebes? He will eventually discover that he was the man who killed Laius. In other words, he killed his own father. And that the woman with whom he has borne sons, namely Jocasta, is in fact his own mother. In utter horror at what he's done, he blinds himself. Jocasta commits suicide, and Oedipus leaves Thebes at the end of the play in exile. And here we have, in a 5th century Greek vase painting, Oedipus solving the riddle of the Sphinx. As you can see, a woman's head and part of a woman's body, body of a lioness, wings, really quite horrifying creature. And there's Oedipus pondering the riddle, about to solve it. Gustave Moreau, the great brooding interpreter of classical myths, painted this interpretation of the riddle of the Sphinx. Notice the almost erotic clinging of the Sphinx to Oedipus, and you can just see in the foreground the foot of one of the humans whom she has killed. When the play opens, we meet Oedipus as a very dutiful king. He doesn't send a messenger out to talk to the people of the city who have come to him as suppliants, begging him to find a way to lift the plague. But he comes out directly, and they praise him. Although you can't equal the gods, we do rate you the first of men, and they recount, not for the last time in the play, that he's the one that could free them from the Sphinx. And Oedipus has already taken steps. he's sent Creon, who is his brother-in-law. Creon is the brother of Jocasta, his wife, and as we will discover, his mother, to the oracle at Delphi to find out what does Apollo say. And Creon comes back and he reports that Apollo's oracle said that the murderer of Laius must be driven away. Now, of course, the murder of Laius had taken place some years earlier. Oedipus has already been king for a while. His fathered children with Jocasta. And Creon further reports that the murderer is still in Thebes. And Oedipus says, well, why didn't you do something about this right away when the king was killed? And Creon says that because of the Sphinx, nobody made any inquiry. They were all so horrified and so terrorized by the Sphinx. And Oedipus immediately vows that he will avenge the murder of Laius. Sophocles is a master of irony, and we find Oedipus saying that by avenging Laius, I will defend myself, because I can't allow a murderer like that to be free in the land. And with added irony, he declares, God help us, we will see our triumph or our fall. And of course, both in the sense that the truth will be discovered and it will be the fall of Oedipus. He sends for the blind prophet Tiresias. How can anybody figure out what was going on? Tiresias, although he has no sight, has been given the gift of insight into all things. And Oedipus is hoping that it is Tiresias who could tell him who the murderer is and what the circumstances are. You'll see throughout this play deep dramatic irony in which the audience knows the significance of what the words and actions are, but the character himself or herself has no idea. Hence we see Oedipus putting a curse on the murderer. My curse on the murderer. I curse myself as well, if by any chance he proves to be an intimate of our house. May the curse I just called down on him strike me. Of course, the murderer is an intimate of the house. It is Oedipus himself. And further on, I hold the throne that he, that is Laius, held then, possess his bed and a wife who shares our seed. Yes, indeed, she does, in a way that Oedipus cannot imagine. And finally, he vows that he will fight to avenge Laius as if he were his own father. And in fact, of course, Laius is. Oedipus has very high hopes that Tiresias, as he says, Tiresias, master of all the mysteries of our life, all you teach and all you dare not tell, signs in the heavens, signs that walk the earth. Blind as you are, you can feel all the more what sickness haunts our city. You, my Lord, are the one shield, the one Savior we can find. So he turns to him to ask for the truth, and Tiresias will not say what he knows. How terrible to see the truth when the truth is only pain to him who sees. I know it well, but I put it from my mind, else I never would have come. And this just gets Oedipus furious, because he is intent on finding the murderer, healing his city, and putting 2 and 2 together and getting 8, he decides that Tiresias must have been part of the plot to kill Laius. And then Tiresias finally, in his own frustration and anger, says, you are the man. I say you are the murderer you hunt. And Tiresias goes on to say, you cannot imagine, I tell you, you and your loved ones live together in infamy. You cannot see how far you've gone in guilt. So Oedipus then assumes that Creon, his brother-in-law, in some kind of palace plot, has to be behind this. And Oedipus in his rage tells Tiresias that he was the one, he, Oedipus, not the prophet, who could solve the riddle of the Sphinx. And now the blind prophet tells Oedipus that he himself is the blind one. You're blind to the corruption of your life, to the house you live in, those you live with. Who are your parents? Do you know? All unknowing, you are the scourge of your own flesh and blood, the dead below the earth and the living here above, and the double lash of your mother and your father's curse will whip you from the land one day. About as heavy as it can get. And he even gives the prophecy, again in great irony, because we know the story, the audience knows the story. One day you will be blind yourself. Blind who now has eyes, beggar who now is rich. He will grope his way toward a foreign soil, a stick tapping before him, step by step. And again we have the irony when Oedipus says earlier to Tiresias, riddles, all you can say are riddles, murk and darkness. And Tiresias at that point taunts him, aren't you the best man alive at solving riddles? The chorus is bewildered by all of this. For them, Oedipus is still the great hero. He is the one who delivered them from the Sphinx. Whether a mere man can know the truth, whether a seer can fathom more than I, there is no test, no certain proof. Though matching skill for skill, a man can outstrip a rival. Never will I convict my king, never in my heart. And then we degenerate into an insult match with Creon, which only ends when Jocasta, Oedipus's wife, Creon's sister, and of course also Oedipus's mother, enters. Jocasta, seeking to put Oedipus's mind at rest, explains how Laius, her husband, exposed the baby to die, so the oracle that told him that he would die at his son's hands must have been false. And of course, this is in and of itself a heresy. The oracle of Apollo never lies. But Jocasta wants to believe that it never had any validity. But then she mentions that Laius was killed at a place where 3 roads meet, and that stirs in Oedipus the memory of a fight at such a crossroads against 5 people, and he demands to interrogate the slave, the one who escaped the fight. So Oedipus tells his own story, how he had feared killing his father Polybus, the king of Corinth, after Apollo had told him, that is Oedipus, that he would kill his father and couple with his mother. And thus Oedipus thought that he could escape his own fate. But now, as Jocasta describes the crossroads, Oedipus recalls that he had killed a king. And so at that point, he wants to be driven right from Thebes. He believes that he, in some strange way, was the murderer of Laius. Even though, and this is an important point, and Sophocles will actually explain it that way in the last play that he ever wrote, which is called the Oedipus at Colonus, that Laius, who tried to drive him off the road, was threatening his life, and that Oedipus was acting in self-defense. Whatever it was in the heroic world, this was not an act of willful homicide, it was a fight. But nevertheless, since Apollo has said that the murderer of Laius needs to be driven from Thebes, Oedipus wants that to happen. And all these curses, no one but I brought down these piling curses on myself. And you, his wife, I've touched your body with these. The hands that killed your husband cover you with blood. The chorus fears that if Apollo's oracle is false, then everything that they believe in falls apart. This is a very, very important part of the play, lines 954 and lines 981 following. Destiny guides me always, destiny finds me filled with reverence, pure in word and deed. Great laws tower above us, reared on high, born for the brilliant vault of heaven. Olympian sky their only father, nothing mortal, no man gives them birth. Their memory deathless, never lost in sleep. Within them lives a mighty God. The God does not grow old. The chorus believes that a guilty man must be punished. And if these things don't happen, if all such violence goes with honor now, why join the sacred dance? Never again will I go reverent to Delphi, the inviolate heart of earth, or Apollo's ancient oracle at Abai, or Olympia of the fires, unless these prophecies all come true, for all mankind to point toward in wonder. They are dying, the old oracles sent to Laius. Now our masters strike them off the rolls. Nowhere Apollo's golden glory now. The gods go down. Very important moment. The chorus feels that if the oracles that were given to Laius prove to be false, then Apollo is false. And all of the worship that they give to Apollo, all of their belief in the gods is threatened. Their whole universe hangs on the prophecies working out. They are utterly bewildered at this point. And again, in great irony, Jocasta begs Apollo for healing. Apollo, who has delivered these oracles that the chorus has just said have to be true, or their whole belief system comes crashing down. O Apollo, Oedipus is beside himself, racked with anguish, no longer a man of sense. He won't admit the latest prophecies are hollow as the old. He's at the mercy of every passing voice, if the voice tells of terror. I urge him gently, nothing seems to help. So I turn to you, Apollo. You are nearest. Well, a messenger comes now to announce the death of Polybus, which one would think should be justification for Oedipus to rejoice and to feel that the oracles have to be untrue. But it gets worse, because the messenger then says to him, you never were the son of Polybus. What were you so worried about? And Jocasta at this point really is ready to throw the whole belief system up in the air, and she says, why should a man fear? It's all chance. Chance rules our lives. Not a man on earth can see a day ahead, groping through the dark. Better to live at random, best we can. And as for this marriage with your mother, have no fear. Many a man before you in his dreams has shared his mother's bed. Take such things for shadows, nothing at all. Live, Oedipus, as if there's no tomorrow. At this point in the play, the threads are coming together, and Oedipus' sense of doom grows thicker. The messenger even explains the swollen feet, and Oedipus is now resolved for all of Jocasta's desire just to let everyone live lightly, not to think about what might have happened, to live at random. This, of course, is the complete opposite of Oedipus, who is intent on solving all riddles. And line 1160, he says, give up now with a clue like this, fail to solve the mystery of my birth, not for all the world. And Jocasta says, stop in the name of God if you love your own life. Call off this search. My suffering is enough. Jocasta at this point knows beyond a shadow of a doubt what the truth is, and she goes inside, never to be seen again. Oedipus, when the herdsman arrives, the herdsman who was assigned to take the baby off into the wilds to expose it to die, he's willing to torture him to make sure he gets the truth. As Oedipus had said, let it burst, whatever will, whatever must. I must know my birth, no matter how common it may be. Oedipus, still thinking that he might be the son of some common slave, still searching for answers, Jocasta knows what the truth is. And Oedipus will get to the bottom of it, even, as I said, torturing the herdsman who had taken him out to die. And the herdsman, under great duress, finally gives every last detail to make it clear that the baby he took was the child of Laius and Jocasta, taken out to die because of the prophecy, but he felt pity for it and gave it to another man to take off to his own country to save the baby from dying. And now Oedipus realizes, as he says in line 13-18, I stand revealed at last, cursed in my birth, cursed in marriage, cursed in the lives I cut down with these hands. The chorus sings in real grief that Oedipus, who had been the best of all men, the one who solved the riddle of the Sphinx, had saved the city. He is the one who's come crashing down in this terrible revelation. Remember that no violence is done on stage in Greek tragedy. You only see the results. A messenger comes in to tell how Jocasta went inside, hanged herself, and Oedipus, taking down the body of his wife, his mother, embracing her, took the brooches off of her dress and dashed out his eyes, so that when we see Oedipus again, we will see him dripping blood from the wound that he inflicted upon himself. And his words, of course, as he committed this horrifying act of self-mutilation, you'll see no more the pain I suffered, all the pain I caused. Too long you looked on the ones you never should have seen, blind to the ones you longed to see, to know, blind from this hour on, blind in the darkness, blind. And in a very important self-revelation, Oedipus says, Apollo, friends, Apollo, he ordained my agonies, these my pains on pains, but the hand that struck my eyes was mine alone. I did it all myself. Keep that in mind, the agency of Oedipus. There's something remarkably heroic about how he goes himself as an agent of his own fate. He has no desire to see his children or his countrymen, his children particularly, realizing that they are the fruit of an incestuous union. And he says something quite remarkable as well, that I've been saved for something great and terrible, something strange. Now, some of that clearly is looking towards the remarkable death of Oedipus, which will be described in the last play that Sophocles wrote, the Oedipus at Colonus. But I can't help but thinking that there's something even deeper about this, the terrible revelation that the life and the demise of Oedipus is going to be for understanding the nature of mankind and the nature of the... And in the very end of the play, after Cleon has come forth and it's clear that Oedipus is going off into exile, the chorus sings, say no man is fortunate till he dies free of pain. Again, a rather important way that the play ends. There's nothing that we can see. Our existence is opaque, and we simply have to find a way of dealing with that terrible fate, that terrible burden of humankind. So we come now to the really important interpretive questions of this great play. There is an old belief, actually based on a misinterpretation of Aristotle's Poetics, that tragic heroes suffer because of some tragic flaw, some moral flaw. And it's important to see that, just in case anybody really missed Sophocles' point, in his last play, the Oedipus at Colonus, he's absolutely clear in asserting his own innocence, that the man I murdered, he'd have murdered me. I'm innocent, pure in the eyes of the law, blind, unknowing. I came to this. And he also tells of how the city of Thebes had given him Jocasta. He had no way of knowing what it was that he was doing. And he is rather blunt about the cruelty of his fate, as he describes the gods when his daughter says, "The gods are about to raise you to your feet. Till now they were bent on your destruction." And Oedipus says bitterly, "It cost them little to raise an old man, someone crushed in younger days." The word in Aristotle that is so often misconstrued as a moral flaw is hamartia, which is an error of ignorance. And of course, that is the quintessential story of Oedipus. He has no way of knowing that Laius, whom he meets at the crossroads, who tries to drive him off the road, who threatens him with his prod, whom he strikes in self-defense, was in fact his own father, that the terrible crime of parricide, of killing a parent, was not an intentional act. Moreover, that his bride, namely the widow of Laius, was his own mother. These were things that he could not possibly have known. And it's very important to avoid that kind of moralizing interpretation of the play. Well, he did it wrong. He did something wrong. He deserves to suffer for it. That's not what Sophocles is telling us. Moreover, Sophocles leaves out something that the Greeks did believe in, that you could inherit the curse that was laid upon a parent or a grandparent. This, of course, we saw in Aeschylus, the curse on the house of Atreus. There's a curse on the house of Laius. But Sophocles doesn't want that to be the dynamic of this play. He's going to force us to something much, much harder, which is to understand the nature of innocent suffering and to ask ourselves why, what sense it makes. And remember, the chorus keeps talking about him as a great man. This is not somebody whom they blame for being angry or being too quick to lose his temper. They look upon this man as an extraordinary hero. And the whole idea of fighting back against somebody who's driving you off the road, especially in the ancient world, is something that would not have seemed particularly out of the realm of normal behavior. What a frightening world this is that Sophocles has put in front of us. Perhaps a very accurate way of viewing the world. There does not seem to be an axis of easy moralization that if you do X, then you will suffer Y, you deserve to suffer it. There is no easy way of saying that, well, there's just a destiny laid upon him, he can't escape it, and therefore it's just a tragedy of destiny. This is actually something that in some ways Freud was picking up on, except there in the psychosexual sense that every man wishes to fight against his father and to have an erotic relationship with a mother. The psychology majors in the class will obviously be familiar with this very important element in the history of psychology. But that does not really answer all of the issues in this play. Remember that Tiresias, remember that Jocasta, they beg Oedipus to give up the search. And clearly, he didn't have to do what he did. He certainly didn't have to blind himself. If he wanted to spare the people of Thebes the plague, he could have left, or as a king is a tyrant, he could have said, well, live with it. Now that I know the truth, that's too bad. But we see here a character who has taken his own agency in dealing with a fate that ultimately he could not avoid. There's never a suggestion in Greek literature that you can avoid your fate. You can suffer beyond your fate. Hupermoiron is the phrase that's used in Homer's Odyssey. So what are we left with in this play? We're left with, as E.R. Dodds rather magnificently writes at the end of that essay on misunderstanding the Oedipus Rex, we're left with a sense of rather grand heroism, somebody who will not give up the search for the truth, even when the search is something that can only cause him pain. Somebody that takes upon himself the agency of his own life in a world that's dark, in a world that's opaque, in a world where human beings are frail and subject to forces beyond their control. Note, too, how brilliantly Sophocles has used the image of blindness. Tiresias, who cannot see, but who knows. Oedipus, who has the gift of sight, of course, but is blind to that crucial question at the core of all of us. What is the secret of my birth? E.R. Dodds writes so beautifully, the Oedipus Rex is a play about the blindness of man and the desperate insecurity of the human condition. In a sense, every man must grope in the dark as Oedipus gropes, not knowing who he is or what he has to suffer. We all live in a world of appearance which hides from us who knows what dreadful reality. But surely the Oedipus Rex is also a play about human greatness. Oedipus is great not in virtue of a great worldly position, for his worldly position is an illusion which will vanish like a dream, but in virtue of his inner strength to pursue the truth at whatever personal cost, the strength to accept and endure it when found. Oedipus is great because he accepts the responsibility for all his acts, including those which are objectively most horrible, though of which he is subjectively innocent. We haven't yet discussed the issue of divine justice, which is, of course, one of the other great focal points of the play. Remember that the chorus, I spent some time talking about this, feels that the oracle has to be vindicated. And remember that Sophocles is renowned for his piety. He does not question the justice of the gods. And in a sense, that ought to be familiar to us as well. Those of us who have read the book of Job in our own Bible, that what Sophocles is saying is that there are things beyond human understanding. Not just the secret of our birth, which was what Oedipus sought so diligently and with such terrible cost to find, but what is justice in the cosmos? What is fair? Why is there innocent suffering? These are questions that have occupied people's minds for ages, and people have come up with many explanations. What Sophocles won't let us do is fall for very easy explanations that it was all in some wonderful divine plan and it's all going to work out. No, instead we have to accept things in our humility as mortals and to fall back on our common humanity, a point that I'm saving for the end. But I do want to read you some lines from the book of Job. Now, remember, this is a different world in which ultimately the believer will acknowledge that there is divine justice, that God is just, that God is loving. That's, of course, not a classically Greek idea. There are certain prerogatives of Zeus to guard hospitality, to guard oaths, to guard suppliants, and one could make the argument that, of course, since Laius had offended against hospitality and raping his host's son, that this curse had fallen on Oedipus. But that's not what Sophocles wants us to think about in this play. If he did, it would have been worked somewhere into a chorus, somewhere into the dialogue of the play. Instead, he is asking us to accept a universe in which the things that we might value as justice are just not there as part of the cosmos. But with that, we will see a partial convergence with the viewpoint that was clearly there in the mind of the author of the book of Job. Have a look at chapter 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, all the sons of God shouted for joy. Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb?" And God continues, chapter 40, "Moreover the Lord answered Job and said, Shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it." Now, of course, Oedipus does question the justice or the mercy of the gods, as we see very clearly in the Oedipus at Colonus at the end. But ultimately, we mortals have to make sense out of a universe that is exceedingly difficult to understand. It's a grand challenge, and there's a certain grandeur about it. I'm going to end with a quotation from one of Sophocles' other plays, the Ajax, which shows in a very clear way what we can draw from within ourselves. In this play, the hero Ajax, whom you'll remember from the Iliad, is the greatest of the warriors after Achilles, had contested with Odysseus for the armor of Achilles after Achilles falls in battle, and by rights he should have had it as the greatest of the warriors after Achilles. But the smooth-speaking Odysseus convinces the other Greeks that he should have it, and Ajax goes mad with grief. And Athena, who's always loved Odysseus, is taking his part and egging Ajax on, manipulating him into even more disgrace. And so she takes Odysseus to the tent of Ajax, where he's lying in all of his madness, and says, "Wouldn't you like to laugh at your enemies? What sweeter laughter can there be than that? Do you see, Odysseus, how great the god's power is? Who was more full of foresight than this man, that is Ajax? Or abler, do you think, to act with judgment?" And Odysseus says, "No one that I ever knew was like him, but I pity him, even though he is my enemy, for this terrible yoke of blindness that is on him. Udunto tutu malon e tu mon scapon. I look at him no more than I look at myself, for I see the true state of all of us that live. We're images and weightless shadows." The Greek authors, the classical Greek authors, don't give us an easy way out. The world of Homer is a frightening world, especially the world of the Iliad, where there is so little redemption from the power, the relentless power of violence and force. And in the Odyssey, the grim world of the dead, Odysseus says to the ghost of Achilles, "Isn't it wonderful, here you are, king of the dead?" And Achilles responds, "I'd rather be a slave on earth than king of all the dead." So without recourse to magic, without recourse to a comforting belief in the afterlife, without recourse to a belief that there is some divine plan that's beneficent to mortals, we find the Greeks confronting all of that human frailty and finding ways, both in their political life and through their literature, to come up with the kind of sense, the kind of rationality that we alone can provide for ourselves. It's a massive task, and there is that grandeur in Oedipus for all of the horror of what befell him, the horror of what he did to himself, that still there was that relentless, unsparing desire to know the truth.